Good day, beautiful people, and welcome to my podcast, Life Treasures and Golden Moments. This is Natalie Silva. This month, I'm happy to announce, is the 6-year anniversary of my podcast. It's hard to imagine at this time that 6 years have passed already. When I started, I had my precious little fur angel, and her name was Angel, sitting by my side as I shared all the various stories about true miracles and also stories of inspiration. She was my inspiration. She went to the Rainbow Bridge now and has passed for several years. But I think of her a lot. That's why I share a lot of stories about animals with you, because I think animals are so special. We were so blessed to have such wonderful authors and their stories with so much to share with us. And I'm sure through the years, as I have been, you've seen and experienced many changes during those years. And I hope during that time that you chose to tune in and listen to my podcast, you have been uplifted and inspired by the stories that I've shared with you and making your life more meaningful and full of purpose on your life's journey. Again, a special thanks to our very talented authors who have shared their stories with us over the last 6 years. And also a very special thanks to my listeners who've been here to listen for the last 6 years. I thank you for your support. I hope I've made a difference in your lives. Today, I'd like to share with you some stories of miracles that have happened in people's lives that are more than just a coincidence. They're true stories of healing and protection and involvement when a loving power will step in and touches their lives, reconfirming that everything happens for a reason, and that reason is made clear more often than not, in the life-changing ways. And sometimes you have to wait a while for that to come to fruition. But it will eventually. When you say, well, why did this happen? What does this change? You keep waiting and you'll find out if you don't get an answer right away. The first story I'd like to share with you today is called Bulletproof, and the author is Evan Miller. Something bad had gone down. That was clear. Police and emergency vehicles jammed the parking lot outside the Fort Worth, Texas McDonald's. Officers took statements from traumatized witnesses. People huddled together. Parents held their children, weeping. Detectives searched for evidence. Shell casings. How many shots had been fired? An APB was blasted out to every unit in the area. Man in white shirt and black jeans, on foot. A crazed gunman, still on the loose. The scene was all too familiar, a reminder of how fragile life can really be. One moment, everything's fine, boring, even all the time. You know how life can be boring. The next, total chaos, ending in unimaginable tragedy. Or was it? Davaj Armstrong's statement told a different story. 5 shots inside the restaurant. At least 2 more fired outside. But as he told the skeptical detectives over and over, they wouldn't find what they expected at the scene. Go back just a few minutes earlier. An ordinary September evening. McDonald's crowded with people enjoying a meal out. A young couple grabbing free refills at the soda machine. Teenagers sitting around laughing and devouring Big Macs and French fries. Everyone blissfully unaware of a nightmare about to unfold. Davaj and his 7-year-old son were in line to order, toward the back of the restaurant. The two of them went there all the time for a quick bite before Davaj went to work. Davaj was talking on his cell phone, his son tugging on him, hungry for a hot apple pie. Davaj noticed the man in the white T-shirt by the door, pacing and being a bit agitated. But the guy wasn't hassling anybody. Davaj pressed the phone against his ear. trying to hear what his older brother was saying on the other end. "You're right," Devarge said, "but I think things are finally coming together." He hadn't always made the best decisions in life, but he was 30 now, more mature, holding down a good job as a home health aide. And his son? This past year, they'd grown a lot closer. Still, he appreciated his brother's encouragement. Just a few years before, their older brother had been killed by an armed robber. That, maybe more than anything, had straightened out Devarge. "Hold on, I got an order," Devarge said into the phone. "Welcome to McDonald's," the cashier said. "What can I get you?" There was a commotion over by the soda machine. Devarge looked to his left. The man in the white T-shirt, he was brandishing a black pistol. "Give me your money," he shouted. No one moved. The gunman turned and charged directly at Devarge, waving the gun in his face. "You think I'm playing?" the gunman said. He leveled the pistol directly at Devarge's head. All around him, people started crying, backing away slowly, hiding behind tables, anything they could find. Some bolted for the door, but for Devarge and his son, there was no escape. There was only the gun, inches away, aiming right between Devarge's eyes. Devarge watched the gunman's fingers squeeze the trigger. "I'm dead," he thought. "It's over." Click! The gun didn't fire. Devarge didn't think, just reacted. He motioned for his son to run. The boy dashed for the bathroom. Devarge surged forward, grabbing the gunman by his shirt, and pushed him against a wall. Hard. The men struggled. The gunman's arms failed. Devarge couldn't get the gunman down, couldn't hold him. The barrel of the gun swung toward his head. Devarge ducked. This was his only chance to get away. He turned and he ran. Any second he expected to hear the gunshot and feel the bullet explode through his back. Click. "Run, just keep running." Click. A third misfire. He saw a door in front of him. He opened it, ducked inside what looked like the manager's office, and pushed the door tight behind him with all his weight. What good would it do, though? The gunman would just fire through it. The door was flimsy, no better than paper against a large caliber bullet. Was his son okay? The thought filled Devarge with fear, anguish. He heard people screaming. He strained to hear his son's voice. Then, nothing. Silence. What was happening out there? He couldn't take it. He had to get to his son. He inched open the door. The dining room was nearly empty. Just a few people pressed against a wall. Peeking around the corner, where was the gunman? Devarge left the office and moved towards the front door. Crack! Now that was a gunshot. The sound made his blood curdle. Then again, crack! The gunman was outside, shooting wildly in the parking lot. Whatever problems the gun had had before, the gunman had fixed. He was ready to take out real targets. He swung around and stared through the glass door at Devarge, his eyes smoldering. Devarge backed away. The gunman stalked to the door, swung it open, and aimed. Devarge wanted to run, but his legs were like lead. The gunman pulled the trigger. Click! He shook the gun, aimed it again at Devarge's head. Devarge threw his arms in the air. "Please, I'll give you anything. My money, my car," he said, "anything." The gunman wasn't listening. He was in a fury, his face contorted with rage, hate, and frustration. Devarge closed his eyes and prepared to die, to meet the Lord. Click! The gunman threw his hands into the air, incredulous. He turned and fled the restaurant, this time for good. Devarge found his son in the bathroom, huddled inside a stall, trembling and sobbing. He looked at his father as if he was seeing a ghost. "I thought you were dead," he cried. Devarge took the boy into his arms. For the longest time they stayed in the bathroom, terrified the gunman would return. Finally they made their way out to the parking lot with the others. The wail of police sirens filled the night. Help was coming, but all DeVos could think about was how many times he heard the sound of the gun misfiring. One by one he counted them, 5 shots in all, at close range. The detectives raised their eyebrows. They asked time and time again if DeVos was sure. But then the other statements came in, backing him up. The surveillance tape showed the gunman's finger on the trigger, pulling it once, twice, 3 times more. When the police finally caught the man, they examined the gun in the magazine. Nothing wrong with it, that they could see. Enough ammo left to have made the McDonald's a bloody, deadly scene. In the months since, DeVos has struggled to make sense of what happened to him, to all of the folks whose lives had been spared that night. He often thought of his brother, who hadn't been so fortunate. For DeVos, there's no simple explanation. Maybe God just needed to show me that miracles still happen, that life is a precious gift, not to be wasted. He says, I'm going to do my best with the second chance I've been given. Oh my goodness, talk about a miracle. He was so lucky and so blessed. And that is a true story. The next story I would like to share is called Protected, and the author is Henry Mungall. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to Henry H.G. Mungall, United States Army, for gallantry and intrepidity in action against an opposing armed force while serving as a crew chief of a Security Platoon 560 Military Police Company, 93rd Military Battalion in the 2nd Military Region, Republic of Vietnam. On the morning of June 12, 1971, at approximately 0900 hours, a truck convoy was attacked by an NVA company. Sergeant Mungall, commander of a V-100 armored vehicle, quickly directed his vehicle driver to go to the rescue of the convoy. Sergeant Mungall's heroic actions in first thwarting the enemy attack and then risking his life by shielding a wounded soldier with his body, administering life-saving first aid, and assisting in his evacuation, showed rare and extraordinary courage and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. Department of the Army, citation, December 31st, 1974. That's how the government tells the story of my Silver Star. But there's another dimension to the story that you will never find in any citation. It began on my first tour of duty in Vietnam. A sweltering night in February of 1969. I sat in the driver's seat of a military jeep and scanned the streets of Bay Hoa. Another soldier and I had set out for an overnight shift, patrolling the bustling South Vietnamese city. I took it all in. Modern concrete buildings next to makeshift shanties, asphalt roads that trailed off into the dirty pass, so unlike the cities back home. I was 21 and had never been in battle, though I'd been around the military all my life. My father had served in World War II in Korea. I felt a mix of anticipation and fear. That afternoon, intelligence reports had picked up on a massive movement of enemy troops in our sector. At midnight, the radio cracked. My commanding officer, "Yellow alert, attack was imminent." Our orders were to inspect a neighborhood at the edge of Bay Hoa and gather intel. We arrived around 1 a.m. at the eerie silent quarter. No one, not even a stray dog in sight. Click. A metallic echo came from a nearby alleyway. My partner and I listened for a few moments. Nothing more. I climbed out to investigate. At the entrance to the alley, I pointed my M16 rifle. The cavernous space was dark except for a few dim lights in the windows above. I advanced slowly, my eyes adjusting to the shadows. All at once, a voice shouted, "Get out!" I flinched and tightened my finger on the trigger. Where had that come from? It was a male voice, very close by. I swiveled around, but there was no one. It hadn't come from the windows. They were too far away. I took 2 steps forward. my mind, I replayed every brush with a bullet. The force that shielded me hadn't come from within. I'd felt it descend from above. Today, my Silver Star sits in a glass case with other honors I earned during my 20 years in the military and 27 more in the CIA. That's a whole different story. But what I treasure most can't be kept in a glass case. It's a connection I first forged as a scared kid thrust into battle when a force pulled me from a dark alley to safety. As Psalm 46:1 says, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. That young man heard a voice in the evening that night and saved his life. So it was a miracle. As my final story of the day, I'd like to share another story with you called Shadow. And Diana Eldon is the author. Tranquil Acres in Decatur, Alabama is a neighborhood that lives up to its name. Comfortable homes and spacious lawns, but not as spacious as to keep neighbors from being friends. That's what kept Bill Hughes and his family in the area, even after his kids had grown, and why retirees Ronald and Carolyn Harris moved there to grow their prize-winning roses. For a rambunctious mutt named Shadow, however, Tranquil Acres was more than a place to call home. It was his calling. He arrived through the classified section of the Decatur Daily newspaper. Becky Hughes, Bill's youngest daughter, was a college student living at home. One morning at breakfast, she flipped through the paper, and an ad caught her eye. Free puppies to a good home. A puppy, that's what I need, Becky thought. She grew up with 4 sisters and 3 brothers, but they moved out and started families on their own. Her friends had gone away for school. It was just her and her parents in the big house, and she was feeling a bit lonely. Wouldn't it be nice to have a furry friend to greet her when she came home from class late at night? Becky went to look for the litter of puppies. One little guy stood out from the rest. He nearly jumped out of the box. He wasn't the cutest of the bunch, but there was something about his big, soulful eyes. His fur was the color of midnight light leaned to blonde, especially in the back, like a shadow had been cast upon half of his body. You sure you can take care of him? Becky's parents asked their daughter, eyeing the pup skeptically when she returned. The skepticism was justified. Shadow would run off as soon as Becky went to classes, but invariably, when her car came up the drive at 8 p.m., Shadow reappeared. He'd hop up on the porch, wagging his tail, waiting for Becky to throw her arms around him. Bill had no idea what Shadow got up to all day, but when Becky was home, the dog didn't leave her side. Shadow had just turned 5 when Bill took a fall at work and had to have hip surgery. The doctor recommended walking every day to speed his recovery. Bill dreaded it. He was shaky on his feet. Even getting around the house exhausted him. He stepped outside, and the driveway looked a mile long. He'd never make it. Then Bill heard a bark. Shadow, the dog, scampered up beside him, as if to say, "Let's go." Shadow accompanied Bill every morning, bounding a few steps ahead. Now and then he turned to check on Bill, impatiently wait for him to catch up. Becky was glad Shadow and her father had bonded. She was about to finish school. Soon she'd be moving out. It felt almost like Shadow wasn't her dog anymore. He was Bill's. The neighbors grew accustomed to the tap-tap of Bill's walking stick against the asphalt and the sight of his ever-present shadow. Ronald and Carolyn Harris often waved at the duo trotting by while they were outside tending to their rose bushes. They raised 2 sons of their own and had dreamed of a quiet retirement out in the country. That's how they ended up on the 3-acre plot, half a mile down the road from Bill. Carolyn had never been a dog person, but there was something wonderful about the way Shadow walked with Bill, as much companion as a pet. "I'll tell you something," Carolyn said to Ronald one morning. If I'm on my own, I'd want a dog just like that by my side, a real devoted dog. She had no reason to think anything would happen to Ronald. While he had some heart trouble in his 50s, he'd been in good health ever since. They were still young and active, but 3 days later, Carolyn was getting ready for bed when Ronald began gasping. He suffered a massive heart attack and died en route to the hospital. Just like that, he was gone. All of Tranquil Acres rallied about Carol, attending Ronald's funeral, filling the house with flowers and comfort food. Their sons came up for a spell, but couldn't stay forever. Soon enough, Carolyn found herself alone. She'd never been alone. It was deeply unnerving. What was life without her beloved Ronald? On a misty night a week after Ronald's death, Carolyn glanced into the backyard and spied a dark shape hovering in the shadows. Her heart hammered until the figure came closer to her deck. What was Bill Hughes' dog doing there at 9 o'clock at night? Shoo, Carolyn said, go home. The dog stayed put. Carolyn picked up the phone and dialed Bill. Your dog is at my house, she told him. He doesn't want to leave. Don't you worry about that, Bill said. He'll come home on his own. If he doesn't, I'll get him up in the morning. Really? In the morning? Still, she couldn't bring herself to invite Shadow in. She checked on him several times that night. He was still there. In the morning, she fed him some scraps and gave him a bowl of water out on the deck. Around 10 a.m., Bill stopped, but as he made his regular turn around the cuddle sack, Shadow dutifully followed Bill. Carolyn felt a bit sad to see him go. It'd been nice to have company, even if it was just the neighbor's dog hanging out in their yard. Half an hour later, though, Shadow was back. He bounded up her driveway, Bill giving chase. Carolyn stepped out her front door. Leave poor Mrs. Harris alone, Bill called. But Shadow planted himself at Carolyn's feet and refused to budge. It's fine, Carolyn said. I don't mind him being here. He stayed all day through the night once again. Shadow was busy. He still walked with Bill every morning. He still met Becky when she came home from school. The rest of the time he took up residence on Carolyn's deck. Carolyn called the Hughes family apologetic. She felt like she'd stolen their dog. I just can't get him to leave, she told Becky. Mrs. Harris, Becky said, is Shadow a bother? Not at all, dear, Carolyn said. He's such a comfort to me. Then I won't force him to come home, Becky said. Invite him in. That's what he wants. Shadow knows where he needs to be and who needs him to be there. Always has. Becky eventually got married and moved away from Decatur. Shadow remained behind. He was a fixture in Tranquil Acres. He belonged there, roaming the subdivision for years, finding people who needed him, following like a shadow until his mission was complete. Thank you so much for listening today and tuning in to Life Treasures and Golden Moments. I hope you enjoyed our stories. And until next time, this is Natalie Silver. Take care and may God bless.